2016 Florida. Vicki, you're on C-SPAN, Spook TV.
Now, Ben, I've read several of your works. I've heard you speak at David Horowitz's group out in Los Angeles one time. At any rate, I'm calling for two things. One, I'm a former Republican. I am so fed up with the party and the politics. I wanted to ask you, are we still able to grab defeat out of the jaws of victory this time around? Are we going to foul it up again? And then secondly, I wanted to say we do need to recommend Friedman's book, Freedom to Choose. That's a great book about freedom of choice. And also I want to mention, talking about civil rights, that Barry Goldwater refused to sign the civil rights legislation because he felt it deprived people of their freedom to associate with those with whom they wanted to associate, which kind of reflects back on this gay marriage thing. At any rate, are we Republicans going to lose?
Say, Vicki, before we get an answer from Ben Shapiro, when you say you're afraid the Republicans are going to screw it up again in 2016, can you give an example of what you mean?
Yes, unfortunately, as a former Republican, I broke my back for John McCain going door to door down here in Florida, and then also for Mitt Romney. And they were such lovely gentlemen, but they ran campaigns. They just could not communicate with the American people on the level that they needed to. And I'm afraid this will happen again because we have such lovely people running, or who look like they're going to be running on the Republican ticket. We just can't be as sharp as the Democrats, it seems, and I'm not sure why. What's the solution?
Ben Shapiro.
Well, I think the solution is getting down to actual basic moral arguments. The left, when I talk about how the left bullies and when they say you're a bad person if you disagree with them, that's because the left, deep down in their heart, they believe that they are morally superior. And I believe that that's an unbased moral superiority. It's unfounded. It's unearned moral superiority. But the truth is that any religious perspective you take, any political perspective you take, in essence, at your very root, you're probably going to feel like you have a certain level of moral superiority for holding those beliefs. I believe conservatism to be a morally superior belief system to leftism, and if people on the right aren't able to articulate that, then that's going to continue to be a serious problem for them. As far as the Republican Party and are they actually going to be able to do any damage here, I think that the fact is that the Republican Senate has been less than useful thus far. What they just did in passing a bill that basically allows President Obama to loosen sanctions on Iran is truly egregious. It was played by the press as though it was a rebuke to President Obama. Far from it. That bill basically allows President Obama to loosen sanctions on Iran unless Republicans can come up with 67 votes in the Senate to stop him. That's going to be a very uphill battle. As far as the Republican nominees, I think there are some who have started to learn about speaking moral language, speaking about the language of rights, speaking in very basic and meaningful terms that people actually resonate to. But unless they can speak in those moral terms on a routine basis, then if they're going to do what Mitt Romney did and trot out 57-point tax plans and talk about everybody's effective marginal tax rate, okay, I happen to know my effective marginal tax rate because I just had to sign a big check to the IRS because of it. But most people actually don't know their effective marginal tax rate. So if that's your pitch for President of the United States, which, by the way, was Romney's pitch, that if your effective marginal tax rate for the highest tax bracket is 35.7 as opposed to 34.2, you're going to cripple the economy. I'm sorry, that's not very much of a pitch for you to be President of the United States.
Next book. What is it?
Well, actually, I'm working on a novel right now, which should be kind of fun. I just felt like changing it up a little bit. So I'm working on kind of a, as most conservatives are at this point, a post-apocalyptic American novel. Right? I mean, I think most Americans are thinking along those lines as we buy our canned food and shotgun shells. So I'm writing something along those lines, and it's a lot of fun to write. And then I've been thinking along the lines of a couple of different topics that I think would be interesting to write about. And one would be the kind of creeping tyranny of the American mind, this move toward I disagree with you, therefore I get to use the government to do whatever it is that I want to do. And that's truly frightening to me because there are plenty of things that I disagree with. I mean, as you can tell, there are plenty of things that I find distasteful and problematic and disagreeable. There are people who do things every day that I find gross and terrible. But I don't think that gives me the ability or the right to use the government as a cram-down mechanism on them, forcing them to do what I want. And I think that unless Americans return to that vision of government, that government is really only there to prevent externalities of interpersonal actions. It's there to protect third parties, then we're going to get ourselves into a lot of trouble. Now, I know that's a pretty libertarian perspective, but I think that we're becoming such a country of divided lifestyles that it's going to be difficult for us to even remain one country in the long run unless we come to an agreement that government is going to have to stay out of it, and we're going to have to just deal with each other on an interpersonal level and let social movements deal with the rest. If you want to live in a religious community, live in a religious community, but it's nobody else's business what kind of community you live in. And same thing if you live in an atheist community, if you live in a gay community, if you live in a Christian community, you should be basically allowed to be left alone. And we all have the freedom of movement. We're all allowed to choose where we live and under what lifestyle we wish to live. And the fact that we've decided on a national level, and it's happened both right and left, unfortunately, that the federal government can be, it's the one ring that you can use that power and you can wield that power. Nobody can wield that power properly. I mean, this is why the marriage debate is so fascinating, because when it comes to same-sex marriage, what the right has to acknowledge is that the government tried to forward traditional marriage and failed. I mean, the government's attempts to forward traditional marriage were a complete failure, which is why for years I've been advocating that the government just get completely out of the business of marriage, because it's not like the government did any good for traditional marriage in the first place. Get the government completely out of it. Let people actually have interpersonal contractual relationships with one another, is what I have with my wife. I mean, we have we have a ketubah, right? I mean, we have a ketubah, which is a Jewish marital document.
Ketubah?
Yeah, it's ketubah. We have a Jewish marital document, and then we also have our state marital document. I don't care about our state marital document. It makes no difference to me. It's just something I had to register with the government. The ketubah is hanging on the wall in our house, as it is in most Jewish households. That was the way that the Jews registered marriage 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, and there's nothing wrong with it today. The idea that I get to make an agreement with this one person, how we are going to live our lives, that seems to me a better system than having the government decide what's an appropriate relationship and what is not an appropriate relationship in a consensual situation that doesn't affect others.
Jim is in Caliente, California. Jim, you're on Book TV with Ben Shapiro. Jim, are you with us? Tell you what, Jim is gone. All right, let's move on to Taylor in Dover, Delaware. Taylor, please go ahead with your question or comment.
Yes, I have a couple of questions for him. One is on a personal level. I just wanted to know if he's ever served in the military or anyone in his family has ever served in the military. I would also like to know if he's so hell-bent, basically, on destroying the federal government, what government would he think that we would need to have in order for us to stay United States of America? And the other question is, I don't understand the Republican Party right now because a lot of their policies are coming from the Ayn Rand Institute, which is based on objectivism, and which is basically, the most non-religious, she was an atheist to begin with, and it's like the Republican Party just worships her, especially Paul Ryan, who gives her book to everyone, and so that's
all right. We got that. Tell you what, Taylor, why did you ask the first question about the military?
Because I get sick and tired of all these people that are pro-military. My dad was shot down, or not shot down, but survived 2 plane crashes in World War II. My husband was in Vietnam and got Agent Orange exposure, and he died very prematurely because of that. And I worked for the United States government for 30 years, and all these people that have never served their government, have never served in the military, they are always gung-ho military, and they do not, it's like they have never served in the military. And like right now, we need the draft.
All right, we've got the point. I appreciate that, and the draft. We'll add that to the list. Ben Shapiro.
Okay, so a couple of things. First of all, I loved your rendition of "Shake It Off." Second of all, as far as your questions about military service, thank you for your family's military service, obviously, as well as your husband's military service. You asked me why I want to destroy the federal government, and then you also asked me why I want to bulk up the military. Those two are in complete opposition. So obviously, I don't want to destroy the federal government. I want to restrict the federal government to the tasks for which it was originally designed, including national security and military defense. As far as the argument, the chicken hawk argument, which is essentially what that argument is, that I didn't serve in the military, therefore I can't be a hawk. Number one, I am not a member of the police force. I still get to vote on police policy. Second of all, when it comes to who defines military policy, hey, folks on the left, I will make you a deal right now. I will never speak again about military policy if we all agree that the members of the military get to vote on military policy. You happy with that? You think that's going to go well for you? I have a feeling that's going to go very poorly for you because it turns out that the members of the military vote disproportionately Republican and agree with me on national defense and national security. As far as the Ayn Rand question, objectivism, what Republicans like about objectivism is that it points out the evils of collectivism. That's really what they like about objectivism. As far as Ayn Rand's personal philosophy, the atheistic notion that selfishness is the ultimate value, I think that most Republicans actually don't agree with that. I think they like her description of capitalism in some ways. I think they love her description of collectivism. But if you ask most Republicans, do they believe in thoroughgoing objectivism, the answer is absolutely not. The vast majority of Republicans do not believe in thoroughgoing objectivism, which is why the vast majority of Republicans are actually religious.
Jocelyn is right here in Los Angeles. Please go ahead, Jocelyn.
Yes, I would like to ask Ben Shapiro, why is he so focused on the Obama administration with regards to privacy and the lack thereof, when this issue was really accelerated with Bush and the Cheney administration? And now that President Obama is in office, it is a big deal. Shouldn't his title read The People versus Bush and Cheney?
Okay, as far as the privacy question, I actually call for prosecution in the book of people who were involved in the surveillance programs under Bush and Cheney. So actually, you sort of make my case. The fact is that I don't restrict it to Barack Obama. When rights are violated, rights are violated. The fact is that the Obama administration did dramatically upscale the amount of surveillance, which is kind of fascinating in light of the fact that the Obama administration has declared the war on terror basically in wind-down mode. It's supposed to be ending, so why exactly are we ratcheting up the amount of information about Americans that we are currently gathering? That seems to be internally contradictory. At least Bush and Cheney were trying to give us an excuse. They were saying that we had a war on terror and we were trying to ferret out the folks who were dangerous. The Obama administration refuses to even acknowledge that folks are dangerous. I mean, we're in the middle of signing a nuclear deal with Iran, even as the Iranian Revolutionary Guard today said that they will not allow any inspections of nuclear facilities. So when you say there's no threat, and yet the threat that doesn't exist is so grave that they have to check all of our emails, I start to get a little bit suspicious.
Editor-at-large for Breitbart, senior fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center, co-host KRLA 870 Los Angeles' The Morning Answer, best-selling author of several books, including his two most recent, Bullies and The People versus Barack Obama. We've got about 15 minutes left with our guest, Ben Shapiro, and Carrie Yakima, Washington. Good afternoon.
Hi, how are you? I'm calling. I'm a gal, and I wanted to talk to Mr. Shapiro about the drought in California. And I wanted to give him my suggestion that we in Washington State, I transferred up here after I graduated from college in California, and I fell in love with snow skiing and stayed. They have lots of water up here. We have mountains falling on people. And I want to, and we have, I am also a child of I'm an Army Corps of Engineer family kid, okay? I grew up in Australia, all over the world, but for the Army Corps of Engineers doing dams and aqueducts, third world countries, helping people get their countries going. Anyway, and so I know how construction works, and I was born when the Oroville Dam was built. My dad was one of the supers on it, and the California...
So, Carrie, where are you going with this?
I want to know why we are not doing something with regards to there is a chain of dams and reservoirs and everything coming all the way down.
All right, I apologize. I'm going to stop you there. Let's talk about the politics of water.
Yeah, I mean, the drought is a really interesting situation because when it comes to the drought, it's pretty clear that environmentalism in the state of California has largely crippled any efforts to build new dams, new reservoirs, desalination. I mean, we have a giant body of water. It's just full of salt. It's right off our coast, and it's really pretty. Israel has somehow figured out how to make desalination plants. They're expensive, but since we're spending $100 billion on a fantasy choo-choo train that doesn't exist, then we might as well spend some money trying to figure out how exactly to provide water to people. As far as building reservoirs and aqueducts, actually down from Washington State and Oregon, of course we should have been doing this. Pat Brown, Jerry Brown's father, actually did a lot of these things. Jerry Brown just reversed all of that. Jerry Brown hasn't done anything on this for 40 years, and now all of a sudden he's decided that he has to restrict everybody's shower length. Well, it turns out that 80% of all water use in the state of California is going to agriculture, and agriculture, for all the talk about how it's we create all the fruits and nuts in the United States in terms of actual fruits and nuts, the fact is that that actually accounts for about 2% of the GDP of the state of California. So in other words, 2% of the GDP of the state of California is actually taking up 80% of the water. Now, Jerry Brown's plan is to reduce water usage in the state of California by 25% in urban areas. If he does that, then he's going to achieve approximately 700 billion gallons of water saving every year. We need about 11 trillion gallons in order to fill up what we've lost. But here's the reality. 160 billions of fresh water are being pumped out into the San Francisco Bay every single year to save the Delta smelt. Another 250 gallons of usable water are being pumped out of there to help the salmon swim to their spawning places. So we really want to hook them up. And so we have to make sure that they have active sex lives by apparently pumping usable water out into San Francisco Bay. You know, this is not exactly the best use of water. And we're going to have to get over the whole subsidies to industries that we like. Look, I like a lot of the farmers in the Central Valley. I think that they're doing something that's incredibly worthwhile. However, one almond takes 4 gallons of water. And the fact is that if you have one segment of the population that represents 2% of the GDP and 80% of the water use, you know, I may think that almonds are more valuable than my lawn. I may think that's more of a value to the United States than me having a lawn. But guess what? It's a free country. If I'm willing to pay for the water, I should be able to pay for the water. The real reason all this is happening, really, is because the state of California has artificially kept water prices low, which means that it's subsidized water use for a lot of people in both urban and agricultural areas. If it had been allowed to go to market price, then you would have actually had competition for the water, and then the water usage would have gone down. I mean, it's amazing. You go to the store. Has anyone ever run out of bottled water at the store? Has it ever happened? No, because the market governs when it comes to bottled water. Nobody ever runs out of Coke. If there's a real demand for Coke, they produce more, and the Coke comes in the next shipment. But when it comes to water, because it's been artificially deflated by the federal government and by the state and local government, that means that the water has been running out for a long time because of how we've decided to divvy it up, basically.
What's the argument against desalinization?
In terms of the environmental argument, because you have to use particular enzymes. Apparently there's biological desalination and chemicals that are used in order to make sure that happens. And they say that a lot of the chemicals are supposedly dangerous, although Israel has never had a problem with this. It is very expensive. I mean, desalination as a project is extraordinarily expensive. They should have been pursuing it 20 years ago. They should certainly be pursuing it now.
And there's a new plant opening, isn't there, off the coast of San Diego?
Yeah, they need to really ratchet up the water production for sure.
Tara's in Charleston, West Virginia. Tara, this is Book TV on C-SPAN 2, author Ben Shapiro.
Hello, Ben. It's great to talk to you. The question that I have is it possible for states' attorneys general to possibly bring prosecution charges against the Obama administration, against the members of Congress who, thumb their nose at the citizens and the Constitution by sitting back and turning their heads away while we are flooded by illegal aliens? And I'm not afraid to use that term because that's what it is, illegal aliens. And I'm scared because what I see happening is with giving the back taxes for the past 3 years for these people, the free college educations, the housing and everything, to me that is buying votes for the next election. And what is it going to take to finally have others in Congress besides Ted Cruz and Trey Gowdy and Mike Lee, the great patriots that they are? What is it going to take to get these people to stand up to this administration and tell them to pretty much quit thumbing their finger at the American people?
Thank you, Tara.
Well, people are going to have to get primaried. As far as my own stance on illegal immigration, my feeling about immigration is very obvious. If there's no welfare state, I don't care who comes. I'm totally open borders if there's no welfare state, because if people aren't coming for free stuff, great, come in and work. Seriously, that's totally fine. In fact, if you want to come here and you want to work, I will trade you. I would, if I were king, right, which is a principle to which I'm fundamentally opposed. But if I were king for a day, I would trade the illegal immigrant who wants to work for the guy who was born here and has been sitting on welfare his entire life, because it's your character that matters, not your place of origin. The problem is, of course, that we have this entire system of benefits that we're now giving out to people, and so that draws people here. They're not bad people. I mean, everybody is inherently has selfishness to them. I mean, we're all self-centered. We're all taking benefits from the federal government at some level. I took Pell Grants. Everybody takes something from the federal government. Until we change that mentality, until we stop offering a lot of these things in the first place, then it's going to be a loss leader. As far as what can states' attorney generals do, I mean, the answer is you're watching it happen right now. The state of Texas is suing the federal government over President Obama's amnesty program. It's been temporarily put on hold by an injunction. We'll see if it goes all the way up to the Supreme Court or not. But as long as it is more politically palatable to pander to the Hispanic vote and to the media by pretending that you have a plan that doesn't end with closing the border and at least doing something about the folks who are here illegally, then you don't have a solution. What's amazing to me is both right and left, it's so cynical. It really is. The right is in favor of illegal immigration because they want cheap workers for the corporations. The left is in favor of illegal immigration because they want voters. Nobody is in favor of illegal immigration for the individuals. Here's my view. Everybody who's in the country illegally, I'm not going to say everybody ought to be deported. Everybody ought to be assessed, and we ought to determine whether they are of benefit or of detriment to the United States, and then on an individual level, we should determine whether they get to stay or whether they get to go. It's bewildering to me how the IRS can go through 100 million tax returns every year down to what exactly I ate for lunch 6 months ago at a kosher restaurant, and whether it was a business lunch or not, but they can't track down 14 million people and find out whether it would be good on net for them to be in the country or not.
Ben Shapiro, Tara called from Charleston, West Virginia, seemed like a fan of yours. If she wants to listen to you, read you, where's the best source for her?
So you can read me in a couple of different places. TruthRevolt.org is one of my websites. You can check me out there. You can also check me out at Breitbart News, where I'm a senior editor at large. And then if you want to listen to me, then KRLA 870, which is the morning answer, is the name of our show, 6 to 9 every morning Pacific time, so 9 to noon on the East Coast. You can listen on KRLA 870. And then in the afternoon, I do a second radio show, so I do 6 hours a day. My second radio show is 3 to 6 in the afternoon Pacific time on KTTH 770 in Seattle. So you can just Google me, and both of those will come up.
And you also tweet. What's your handle?
Oh yeah, I tweet a lot, as you know. I mean, I'm rather volatile on Twitter, so it's at Ben Shapiro. If you want to see wild and crazy stuff, political debates extraordinaire, as well as odd tweets about Bill Clinton's 1970s kinship to Chewbacca. And if you've ever seen what Bill Clinton looked like in the 1970s, there is a picture of Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton standing next to one another, and I tweeted that out recently with the caption, "Chewie, we're home."
Eli, Wilmington, North Carolina. Please go ahead, Eli.
Actually, it's Ellie, different gender.
Ellie, I am so... do you know what?
No
I'm reading
problem.
off an iPad, and that's exactly what it says. I apologize.
No problem at all. I don't want to use my time correcting that. Obviously, the gentleman, I don't want to promote his name, actually, it is quite intelligent. It's unfortunate that he kind of misuses it. I am Jewish, and I have to so strongly object to his trying to portray his own misguided attempts at politics and talking fast. Not all Jews talk fast, and promoting stereotypes. Number one, he does a great disservice to the Jewish people all over the world by promoting his stereotypes, and he's laughing at it, which I find I hold what he's doing in disdain. I just came from a wonderful Jewish film festival here in Wilmington and saw the film The Jewish Cardinal. And this man and the Catholic Polish clerics did far more when they smartened up and had a little more compassion for people than this guy has. And as far as how he treats
Tell
people,
you what, Ellie, politically, Ellie, do you disagree with Ben Shapiro when it comes to his politics as well?
I'm sorry?
Do you disagree with Ben Shapiro when it comes to his politics as well as some of the things you've already mentioned?
I do disagree with him with some of his politics quite a lot, but it's a separate issue to promote some stereotypes against the Jewish people and using his Jewishness
Terrific.
to sell his...
Let's get a response. That was Ellie in Wilmington, North Carolina. Ben Shapiro.
Well, I really didn't realize that the Grim Reaper of the sense of humor was on the loose today. I mean, seriously. I mean, if the worst stereotype about Jews is that we speak quickly, I think we can deal with that. Really, that one ranks real low on the list of stereotypes I'm going to worry deeply about. I'm going to worry significantly more about a president of the United States who's going to promote a nuclear bomb in Iran, and a president of the United States who has routinely leaked Israeli national security information, and a Democratic Party that's gone along with him, and a Republican Party that basically just signed off on it in the Senate. I'm going to worry more about that and less about whether Jews talk quickly.
How serious is the so-called rift between the Obama administration and Israel?
Extraordinarily serious. But this is what the president wanted all along. I mean, back in 2007, according to David Axelrod, he was already talking about how he wanted to create distance between himself and Israel because he wanted to be the honest broker between Israel and its enemies. And the fact is the president has been radically anti-Israel since he began running for president. His entire staff was staffed by people like Robert Malley, who was negotiating with Hamas, like people like Zbigniew Brzezinski, a foreign policy advisor who was radically anti-Israel under Jimmy Carter, by people, I mean, General Merrill McPeak, who had said that in New York City was filled with Jews who basically ran foreign policy in the United States. And the president has spent his entire life associating with anti-Israel, anti-Semites. I mean, seriously, Rashid Khalidi is an anti-Semite. He's a Palestinian liberation organization terrorist advocate, and he was a close friend of President Obama. President Obama spent time in Jeremiah Wright's church. It's a radically anti-Israel, anti-Semitic church. You spend your entire life in... I've been in a synagogue. I've gone to the same synagogue since I was 11 years old. If at any point, the rabbi of the shul had gotten up and started speaking about black people or America, the way that Jeremiah Wright spoke about Jews, white people, and the United States of America, I would have been out of there so fast it would have made your head spin. But Barack Obama sat there for 20 years. Don't tell me he didn't imbibe any of that or believe any of that. The president has a belief system, and the president is acting out his belief system in real time, and that has real ramifications for real people, not just Jews, by the way. You're watching it happen in Egypt, where he's cutting off military shipments to what is a secular regime in the face of a Muslim Brotherhood uprising. He's busily going against a Saudi regime that is really, I mean, listen, I'm not a fan of the Saudis by any stretch of the imagination, but they're a hell of a lot better than the Iranians at this point. The president of the United States is single-handedly turning Iran into a regional power, and this is part of a broader policy of the president of the United States that's both anti-American and anti-Israel and springs from the same anti-Westernism that he represents personally.
John, San Francisco, good afternoon. Ben Shapiro is our guest.
Hello, Ben. Pleasure to talk with you. I just wanted to get your take on something as a fiscally responsible, lesser government kind of guy. It makes my blood boil somewhat, is the propensity of the U.S. to take billions of dollars of our taxpayer money and put it towards the National Endowment for Democracy and other such NGOs that take U.S. foreign policy, and it seems as if what they're doing is something we would not accept here, is interfering within the internal politics of countries. And you could see it manifested especially in the Ukraine, where Victoria Nuland bragged that we had spent $5 billion over a period of time to achieve that regime change. And you can see it followed through with the constant propaganda against the people in the east of Ukraine who were more or less against the Maidan movement from the beginning and who were culturally Russian. And it was not them who attacked the Western Ukrainians. It was
John. Hey, John, where did your interest in these issues that you've just discussed come from?
Well, it's just a history. I'm a bit of a history buff going back to World War II, and to understand the Ukraine, it's a very complex country, and the situation is very complex. But I think the facts have not come out in the United States media about what's really going on there, and
all right. Let's hear from Ben Shapiro.
So I'm not familiar with the exact Democratic project that he's talking about, the 501c3 that apparently he's talking about. As far as American policy toward Ukraine, it's been egregious. I mean, the fact is that the United States basically led on the Ukrainian revolution under the assumption that we were going to defend them when the Russians came, and then we didn't defend them when the Russians came. So it's no big shock that was happening. I mean, the President of the United States has so far sold out basically every potential or real ally that the United States has in favor of people that he would prefer to woo. I mean, he's sold out Ukraine and Poland, Czechoslovakia, all of these countries in favor of a Russia that he basically just signed off on sending S-300 missiles to Iran. I mean, the other day he did that. The President of the United States is actively opposed to a more powerful United States and its allies in the world, and somebody's going to fill that gap, and the people who tend to fill that gap are the worst people on the planet.
Helen, Palo Alto, California. I think you might be the last voice today.
Perfect. I'll use my time well. I find it so egregious that he would come and conflate so many slogans and all this information like Jeremiah Wright that the Republicans always call up and something from Obama's past. But anyway, my big issue is how the Republican Party, and if you're aware that both the Congress and the Senate, all the Republicans there are all Christian, and the Republican Party and the Congress, excuse me, are the gatekeeper, they hold the purse strings, and we have no clue about the budget. And did you know that about $22 billion go to faith-based funding, and we don't even know who or what is going there, and most of them are Christians, and how the money for the faith-based funding, and it's almost impossible to get that information without suing for the Freedom of Information Act to get that information, and a lot of that money is funneled, and the Congress has put a moratorium.
All right, you know what, Helen, we're going to leave it there. Ben Shapiro, final comment.
I mean, as far as faith-based organizations and the government's involvement in them, I think it's significantly more dangerous for religious organizations to be involved with the government than not. The strings are always attached. As far as the federal government trying to promote policy through faith-based organizations, I would recommend that people actually look at where that money is going, because a lot of the time it's actually going toward adoption projects and house building for the homeless and this sort of stuff. Now, I actually object to that on the grounds that I don't think the government should be involved in that, but that has nothing to do with, is the money actually being spent on some sort of covert religious attempt to convert everyone to Christianity. As a Jew, I'm not specifically very worried about that in the United States.
Ben Shapiro, best-selling author, radio talk show host, editor-at-large at Breitbart, The People versus Barack Obama, the criminal case against the Obama administration, his most recent book just coming out in paperback. Thanks for being on Book TV from the LA Times Book Festival.
Thanks so much for having me.
And Book TV will continue in just a moment. Everything that you've seen today will re-air this evening on Book TV on C-SPAN 2. All 6 or 6.5 hours of our coverage today from LA. Thanks for being with us. We want to thank the folks here at the LA Book Fest and at USC for their hospitality. And now Book